And the Texas Disability Issues Forum is back. I hope you had time to discuss what Mr. Collier said. Take a break. And now our next candidate coming on, he's running for State Attorney General, Justin Nelson. Justin is a husband, father of 3, lawyer, professor at UT Law School, and a proud product of Houston Public Schools. He's running for Texas Attorney General on 3 simple values: fairness, justice, and integrity. The election will come down to a choice. Who should we hire as the lawyer for the state of Texas? Justin will represent all Texans and work to ensure that everyone is equally treated under the law, committed to combating gerrymandering, fighting consumer fraud, and standing up to corruption. Justin will protect our citizens. Let's welcome Justin Nelson.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi, Patrick.
Hi. Thank you for being here.
Great to be here.
So we started off the conversation with Mike Collier about just the nature of the office that he's running for, and I think that
Yeah.
this applies in a very interesting way. In your case, you're running for Attorney General. So let's just start there. What, as the state's top lawyer, what are some of the responsibilities? What is the platform that you have to help Texans with disabilities?
The job of the Texas Attorney General is to protect all Texans, to stand up for justice. And it's to be a voice, to make sure Texas has really strong laws on a host of issues. And it's to make sure that those laws are enforced fairly and accurately and according to the Constitution. I've run on fighting against corruption, fighting against fraud, making sure that everybody has a voice, fighting against gerrymandering, and making sure, most importantly, that there's justice for all, period.
Mm-hmm. Within that issue portfolio, what do you see as some of the most important areas for Texans with disabilities? On the candidate survey, there were some questions about the criminal justice system and the challenges that people with disabilities may face, whether it's prosecutorial misconduct or whether it's just broader barriers to justice. How does that factor into how you think about how this job can be used to help Texans with disabilities?
I think it's just a mindset of making sure that we recognize that for too long, if you have a disability, that there's a good chance that the system is going to discriminate against you. And it's to make sure that the Texas Attorney General is representing you across the board and to be a voice in case there is discrimination, in case there are needs that the state government or private businesses are not meeting.
Right. One more specific issue within the criminal justice system is sexual assault.
Yeah.
And there are reports showing that people with intellectual disabilities are the victims of sexual assaults at a rate that's more than 7 times that among those without such disabilities. What could or will you do as Attorney General to help close that gap and address that challenge?
It's a huge issue, Patrick. Right now we have literally thousands and thousands of untested rape kits, for example. And what we have to do is make sure that the Texas Attorney General is focusing issue on preventing sexual violence and domestic violence across the board. And as you say, it is a real challenge because if you have a disability, you are substantially more likely to be hit with or be the recipient of really awful sexual violence or domestic violence. And it's just, the Texas Attorney General needs to be a voice to change that and to make sure that everybody has a voice.
Mm-hmm. How do you assess where the current Attorney General's office is on these issues?
The Texas Attorney General currently I think he's just distracted by his own indictment. I mean, let's remember where we are on this, right? We have a Texas Attorney General right now who has been indicted by a grand jury for fraud. He is the first elected official in Texas statewide history ever to run for re-election while indicted. And it's wrong. It is totally wrong. And so he has made it into a political office. Thank you. We can do so much better. I've never run for office before. I am doing this because we need someone who is approaching this as a lawyer who will enforce the laws fairly and accurately, and not to use the office as a political point just to try to do something like, I don't know, take away pre-existing condition protections in health care. It is so ridiculous right now. Ken Paxton is trying to take away pre-existing conditions for health care coverage, not just for all Texans, but for every single American. There is a hearing set in Fort Worth on September 5th at 9:30 a.m. And in that hearing, it's called Texas versus United States. And in that hearing, Ken Paxton is trying to take away pre-existing condition protections using Texas taxpayer dollars. It is so wrong. What business of it is the Texas Attorney General to try to take away pre-existing condition protections for health care coverage? It is so wrong.
Right. Certainly, Ken Paxton leading the national charge to end the ACA. As you've traveled the state and you've talked to Texans, particularly Texans with disabilities, what are the stakes of what he's doing there for them, or what have you learned are the stakes for them?
I think, especially with people with disabilities, the stakes just on taking away pre-existing condition protections, and I do talk to people around the state, are just tremendous. I just completed a 12-city tour. We started in Austin, then we went to Laredo and McAllen and Brownsville, and then back. We went to Dallas, Wichita Falls, Memphis, Texas, Amarillo, Lubbock, Abilene, San Angelo, Brownwood, Texas, Round Rock, and ended up in Houston on the Hurricane Harvey anniversary. And everywhere I went, the people who spoke to me about their fear, about losing coverage for pre-existing conditions, about having an attorney general who is using Texas taxpayer dollars to further his own political interest as opposed to the special interests. And that's not what he is focused on, the special interests, not on what should be happening, and as a protector of all Texans. And so I am very worried about what's going to happen if pre-existing condition protections go away. And yes, Ken Paxton is wanted for fraud, but he should be wanted for taking away our coverage for pre-existing condition protections, more importantly.
I want to move on to another issue that was raised in the candidate survey. I talked about this issue of sovereign immunity with Mike just a half hour ago. You said in your survey, in order for sovereign immunity to be waived in cases involving ADA violations, the Texas legislature would have to pass a law. Now, you obviously will not be playing a legislative role as Attorney General, or at least theoretically. But is that something that you support personally, or just in principle?
Yeah,
How do you grapple with that issue?
I think I come at it from the perspective of justice, which is, regardless whether there's a waiver or not, what is important for everybody is to have access to courts, to access to redress. Because we all know that the best way to get justice is to have access to redress, to be able to petition, to if you have something that is wrong with you, to have someone who's going to hear your claim. I clerked for Justice Sandra Day O'Connor on the Supreme Court now over 15 years ago. And there was a decision, my term, called Hibbs, which said that under the 14th Amendment that sovereign immunity could be waived and should be waived for Family and Medical Leave Act issues. So I would expect that as we get into it, that it is the right thing to be able to waive sovereign immunity for the ADA, but ultimately that's going to be an issue for the courts and for the legislature.
Are there other, short of waiver legislation or whatever term you'd like to use, are there other reforms that you would advocate for that address this issue of access to justice?
Well, I think generally speaking, we need to have a court system that works. We need to make sure that at a very simple measure, we need to have the fully funded court system where people aren't waiting years for justice. We also, just in terms of access, we need to make sure that state agencies, when I was just recently in my tour across the state, I spoke to someone who has a child with disability and who is both deaf and blind. And there is a years-long waiting list, years-long, just for that person to get the necessary help. And so what I think is so vital is through all types of access, that the Texas state government and the Texas Attorney General be a voice to make sure that people with disabilities are getting the justice and services that they deserve.
How do you deal with those wait lists? I didn't have that as a question, but I know it was asked in your candidate survey. I don't have the response on me right now, but how do you address those waits?
I just think that the Texas Attorney General should be an advocate behind the scenes to state agencies to say, this is ridiculous, and let's call it what it is. It is ridiculous. Remember, these are not made-up claims. These are people who have already qualified for significant, in many cases, severe disabilities, and yet can't get the help that they deserve and are entitled to under state and federal law. And so what I expect is that I will be a voice and try to build consensus and say, what are we doing not taking care of our duties and obligations under state and federal law and making sure that we are treating everybody according to the justice that everybody deserves?
Now, something that would certainly fall under your purview as Attorney General is consumer protection.
Yes.
It's obviously a consumer protection division of the Attorney General's office. How do you grade the performance of the current administration in that regard? And already got some reaction from the audience. And how would you work to ensure that consumers with disabilities are protected in Texas?
Yeah, I would grade Mr. Paxton's performance on consumer fraud to be incredibly poor.
Where has he fallen short?
He just hasn't devoted the resources to do it, and it's no surprise we have a fraudster in charge of the fraud department. And what we need to do is, instead of filing these political lawsuits that take away resources and taxpayer dollars, we need to devote huge effort to enforcing these really strong state laws fairly and accurately and making sure that nobody is taken advantage of for fraud or deception. And the unfortunate reality is that falls, I think, disproportionately on those with disabilities, because fraudsters and scamsters see folks with disabilities often as a source of who they try to pick off and try to take advantage of, and it's wrong. And so what I will do is that I hope everybody knows that when I'm a Texas Attorney General, we will have a Texas Attorney General who will fight for everybody and make sure that if there is a complaint, we can go to the Texas Attorney General and that we will investigate. Just this past weekend, I was in Houston on the anniversary of Hurricane Harvey. The amount of frauds and scams that happened in Houston and throughout the Gulf Coast, whether from Rockport all the way up to Port Arthur and Orange and Beaumont, has just been tremendous. And so what we need to do is to actually investigate every single instance of these frauds and scams that come into, that people try to do, and that people should know that they can turn to the Texas Attorney General to do that.
Yeah, I want to ask about that. I guess a related issue on your survey, you asked about emergency preparedness, making sure that Texans with disabilities are fully included in that process. I guess by extension of that, you have after these disasters and the frauds and scams that take advantage of people with disabilities. I know that the current Attorney General has talked about that, maybe done some work on that. Is there, based on your travels, what you're hearing from people hit by the storm, is there more work to be done in preventing that and tackling it?
There is absolutely more work to be done in preventing the frauds and scams. Here's my three-point plan. First is making sure that everybody knows they can turn to the Texas Attorney General if the insurance company is trying to take advantage of you, whether it's the Texas Windstorm Insurance Association or any other insurance company. I hear story after story of insurance companies giving lowball bids to people whose houses have been totally destroyed, and there's no one to turn to. Number two, it is investigating every single instance of illegal price gouging or frauds or scams. And that's just not it didn't happen. The resources weren't there.
The office currently doesn't have the resources.
It's just they decided not to make it a priority. And that means that we will have a team that is ready to go. And yes, we're talking about Hurricane Harvey and hurricanes right now, but it could be fires, it could be tornadoes throughout the state of Texas. And this leads to number three, which is to have Texas should be the best in the nation of responding to natural disasters. So to have a protocol in place so that we know exactly what should be done to make sure that no one's taken advantage of and that the Texas Attorney General is there to protect you. This is not a partisan issue. One of the main problems right now that we have as Texas Attorney General is that office has become so politicized to make a point for Tea Party political purposes that it has failed to just prosecute and do the basics of what the Texas Attorney General should do. And whether that's on consumer fraud, whether that's on child support, whether that's investigating corruption, that's just not happening because instead my opponent sees the office as just a way to make a political point, and that is wrong. You should not know whether the Texas Attorney General is a Democrat or Republican. The Texas Attorney General should be there to protect every single Texan, period.
I got one more issue question for you, but you've talked, and this is just a big picture kind of political question, you've talked about depoliticizing the office. What assurances or why should Texas voters have confidence that you're obviously a Democrat, that you'd come in and that you have the qualifications and the experience to not take it in the other political direction? Well, you know, I'm specifically thinking maybe Republicans who don't like where the current direction is, they don't like Paxton. What's the message to them that you're not going to come in and take it in the other direction politically?
My message to anybody who is considering voting for me is that I have devoted a life based upon applying the law fairly and accurately. I clerked for 2 Reagan-appointed judges, including Justice Sandra Day O'Connor on the Supreme Court. I've been named a Texas super lawyer. I teach at University of Texas Law School. And I am running to try to take the politics out of the law. I am running because what I see offends me, that we have a Texas Attorney General who not only is indicted for fraud, investigated for bribery, steals $1,000 pins from courthouse security, whose net worth has grown 100-fold from $30,000 to $3 million while he was in public service. That is wrong and totally offensive. But most offensively, it is to use that office in a way that is totally partisan, in a way to further his own political and special interest agenda, and that is not what the people of Texas deserve or want.
One final question. This is one of the first questions we asked Mike Collier. I want to ask you about it as well, is the issue of medical marijuana. Again, as state's top lawyer, you may have a different view on this or different role in this than if you were the lieutenant governor or governor. But where do you personally stand on this issue, specifically when it comes to what was asked about in the survey, which is expanding the legal use so that people with additional medical conditions can be covered by it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as Texas Attorney General, you have the obligation to enforce the law. I think, like the vast majority of Texans, I would like to see medical marijuana become an option, whether that's through oils or through more regulation. I mean, look, we have something right now where I think the Republican platform and the Democratic platform actually agree on this. And the reason why we don't have it, a lot of it is because we have a really gerrymandered House and Senate right now that doesn't fully reflect where the people of Texas are. And it's actually I know it's not quite on medical marijuana, but it cuts across the board here, which is, I think, one of the reasons why people feel so disempowered right now is that we have a political system that is so polarized, where all you have to worry about is the people who vote in a primary. And the vast majority of districts right now are gerrymandered to favor Republicans. And so we have a system, whether it's on medical marijuana or a whole host of issues, that just don't reflect where the people of Texas are. So this is upcoming a redistricting cycle, and I plan to make sure that we have a Texas Attorney General who will not discriminate, who it's unfair to treat any group with disfavor. And that's what's going on. Mr. Paxton drew the lines, helped draw the lines, and helped enforce these laws. They are totally unconstitutional to be able to discriminate like this, and that's why we feel this in our political system, that we don't have a political system that is responsive to the people of Texas. And I plan to be that voice, to be able to respond to all Texans, and to be able to use that in a role to help with justice. And we have it right now that my mission here is who you do want to hire as a lawyer for Texas. And the choice will be integrity versus indictment. And I hope the people of Texas will see that, and I'm hopeful they'll make the right decision.
Justin, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Of course.